rights situation on the ground in Bahrain has deteriorated year after year since 2011. The 14th February anniversary is a stark reminder of government's unrelenting repression. Today, there is a complete closure on freedom of expression, on freedom of assembly, and on freedom of association. Human rights defenders are either in prison, exile, or under threat. Whoever expresses his views is harassed, arrested, or has his family members targeted as a tool of pressure to stop his activism. I am delighted on behalf of Bahrain Center for Human Rights to welcome the expertise and commitment to human rights in this room. We have human rights experts, members of international organizations, CSOs, activists, researchers, and journalists interested in Bahrain. Thank you so much for your contribution. It helps Bahrain Center for Human Rights in its important work. We are here today because we care about human rights and about Bahrain. Together, we want to have an impact and a higher influence that will allow us to improve the situation of human rights in Bahrain and tackle the deterioration of human rights. First of all, we have two themes for our discussions. The first one is impunity in Bahrain, and the second one is the ongoing violations in Bahrain. Your contribution is very important and essential, and we need everyone to be actively involved in the discussion. I would like to introduce Mr. Hussein Al-Sharif, member at Maharat Foundation, and Mrs. Aya Majzoub, researcher at Human Rights Watch, to join us here. Please, thank you all, and let's wish for the best. Thank you.
We can do our prepared talk there and then have a Q&A here.
Okay. Yes. Yes. طيب. Who wants to join us first? Yes.
أول شيء يعطيكم العافية. طبعا بدي أشكر مركز البحرين لحقوق الإنسان على الدعوة. خليني أعرفكم. أول شيء أنا حسين شريف من مؤسسة مهارات. مؤسسة مهارات عاملة على حرية الرأي والتعبير بلبنان وبالمنطقة العربية، ومن ضمن اختصاصاتنا أو اهتماماتنا موضوع البحرين. طبعا أول شيء بدنا نحكي عن البحرين من مدة 8 سنين. نحن اليوم بالذكرى الثامنة للحراك في البحرين. للأسف 8 سنين من الحراك بالبحرين الوضع يزداد سوءا. مجموعة من الانتهاكات تتزايد يوميا. إذا بدنا نحكي من 2011 بعد تشكيل لجنة بسيوني لتقصي الحقائق، أعطت مجموعة من التوصيات. اللجنة أعطت مجموعة من التوصيات، منها تشكيل هيئة مستقلة لموضوع تنفيذ التوصيات. للأسف شكلت الهيئة ولكن بشكل صوري. الهيئة كانت عبارة عن ممثلين للسلطة البحرينية، ولم يكن هناك ممثلين للمعارضة أو المجتمع المدني، وبالتالي لم تنفذ هذه التوصيات. كان من أحدى التوصيات الأساسية هي تخفيف على موضوع الأحكام الصادرة بحق حرية الرأي والتعبير. وشفنا بال 2015 و 2016 اعتقال الناشط ورئيس مركز البحرين لحقوق الإنسان الناشط نبيل رجب لمدة أول شيء 2 ومن بعدها 5 سنوات بسبب تغريدة على تويتر تنتقد ممارسات حرب اليمن. إضافة إلى هيك مجموعة من الانتهاكات المتزايدة بعدة مواضيع. يعني خلينا نحكي أرقام، ما رح نحكي أكثر من أنه تنثبت الوقائع اللي عم تصير بالبحرين بشكل متزايد. موضوع سحب الجنسية، للأسف لجنة بسيوني لم تلحظ الموضوع لأنه لم يكن هناك سحب للجنسية بهذيك الفترة، ولكن من بعدها 802 حالة حتى اليوم سحب جنسية بالبحرين. وللأسف سحب الجنسية بيكون له تبعات قانونية جدا كبيرة. يعني المواطن لا له حقوق بالعمل ولا له حقوق بالتعبير ولا له حقوق بالتنقل ولا له أي حق بالبحرين. إضافة إلى موضوع منع السفر، ويمكن بيشوفوها العديد من الناشطين البحرينيين اللي كانوا بيشاركوا بمؤتمر حقوق الإنسان أو لجنة حقوق الإنسان بجنيف أو مجلس حقوق الإنسان بجنيف، كان يمنعوا من السفر، يمنعوا من التعبير عن القضايا، وبالتالي أصلا الانتهاكات لا تصل إلى مجلس حقوق الإنسان. إضافة إلى هيك في عندنا مجموعة من القوانين والتشريعات يلي تمت بالفترة الأخيرة. موضوع إطلاق يد القضاء العسكري بالبحرين. للأسف من فترة 2017 شهدنا موضوع إطلاق يد القضاء بمحاكمة المدنيين، وبالتالي الكثير من الأحكام المتشددة صدرت بحق الناشطين وبحق مواطنين بحرينيين. منا أحكام إعدام، للأسف نفذ 3 أحكام بال 2017 وصودق على مجموعة من أحكام الإعدام قبل شهر تقريبا. مجموعة أخرى من أحكام الإعدام للأسف ستنفذ. إضافة إلى موضوع القانون الآخر يلي هو القانون سيء السمعة أو سيء الصيت، هو حماية المجتمع ضد الأعمال الإرهابية. وهذا القانون يسبب مجموعة من التأثيرات السلبية، منها الاختفاء القسري. بعض الناشطين بالبحرين يتم إخفائهم قسريا بعد الاعتقال من جهاز الأمن الوطني لمدة 7 أشهر، مثل أحد المواطنين حسين علوي تقريبا عدة أشهر لم يلتقي بمحامي تحقيق وتعذيب، وبالتالي أي اعتراف ممكن يطلع من عنده للناشط بكل سهولة أو من المواطن. فمجموعة انتهاكات تتزايد للأسف، وللأسف أنه هيدي الانتهاكات من بعد 2016 وصول ترامب إلى السلطة بالولايات المتحدة أطلقت يد الحكومة البحرينية. يعني حتى فترة باراك أوباما منعت في بعض الأحيان صفقات للسلاح. للأسف رجع وفتح المجال أمام صفقات سلاح للسلطات البحرينية يلي عم تكون يعني خفف الضغط بشكل كتير كبير من قبل الولايات المتحدة وبريطانيا بهذا الإطار. نجي لموضوع الآليات الدولية. للأسف نحن كجمعيات ومجتمع مدني وعامل بهذا الموضوع لم يبقى لنا سوى التوثيق. يعني نحن مجرد عداد لأرقام الانتهاكات، لكن الآليات الدولية والميكانيزمات الدولية لمتابعة أو ملاحقة السلطات البحرينية توقفت، لأنه توقف الضغط من عدة دول كبرى كانت بتأثر بالقرار البحريني. يمكن هلا رح نزيد شويه معلومات بالجلسه، او يعني بدي اشكركم على تواجدكم اليوم، وبتمنى الوضع نلتقي السنه القادمه يكون الوضع ما رح نقول يختفي الانتهاكات او تختفي الممارسات للسلطات البحرينيه، ولكن تكون على القليله بشكل اقل من اللي عم نشوفه حاليا. شكرا.
Hi everyone. So I'm Aya Majzoub from Human Rights Watch. I'm the Bahrain researcher at our organization. So the topic that I want to discuss today is Bahrain's approaching a complete shutdown on freedom of expression. In the last few years in particular, the Bahraini authorities have demonstrated that they have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to the free media, independent political thought, and peaceful dissent. What's particularly striking is that we've seen all the branches of government in Bahrain engaged in this campaign to silence all criticism of the ruling family: the judicial authorities, the legislative authorities, and the executive authorities. First, the judiciary. There are serious concerns about the integrity and independence of the Bahraini judiciary, and it seems to be a key player in the silencing of dissent and the crackdown on freedom of expression. Almost all opposition leaders have either fled the country or have been convicted and imprisoned by the judiciary. In the last 2 months alone, we saw the Court of Cassation uphold a life sentence issued to Sheikh Ali Salman, leader of Bahrain's now dissolved Al-Wifaq. This life sentence was handed to him by the Bahrain High Court of Appeals on November 4, overturning his previous acquittal by a lower court. 2 other senior members of Al-Wifaq were also sentenced to life imprisonment. Additionally, on New Year's Eve, the Court of Cassation upheld the 5-year sentence issued to Nabil Rajab as a result of his tweets criticizing the Saudi-led military campaign in Yemen and alleging torture in Bahrain's Jau prison. These allegations of torture in particular are ones that Human Rights Watch has investigated, documented, and verified. Human Rights Watch has also documented a broader trend of the judiciary criminalizing dissent and entrenching impunity. So while the authorities have been actively prosecuting individuals such as Nabil Rajab and Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja for exercising their rights to free speech, there have been very few prosecutions of security personnel that have been involved in very serious and widespread abuses against citizens, particularly during interrogations and detention. The few prosecutions in connection with this abuse have involved almost exclusively low-ranking officials and have, without exception, resulted in acquittals or disproportionately light sentences. So killing a protester by firing shots at close range without justification and beating a detainee to death earned those responsible sentences of 6 months and 2 years, respectively. This stark contrast between the results of prosecutions of security personnel and prosecutions for crimes based on peaceful speech and assembly-related activities presents a very harsh indictment of Bahrain's criminal justice system. Additionally, the judiciary has been responsible for the majority of the citizenship revocations recently, with 2018 being a record year in terms of the number of individuals who've had their citizenships revoked. The judiciary has also been behind the issuance of orders to dissolve key opposition and independent political societies, including Al-Wa'ad and Al-Wifaq. Second, there have been the legislative authorities, which have also taken part in this crackdown on freedom of expression, and they've amended and adapted their laws such that the government is able to crack down on free speech. So first, authorities have used overly broad definitions of terrorism in the Terrorism Act to detain protesters and convict opposition leaders, including people who participated in the anti-government protests in 2011. The definition of terrorism extends to nonviolent acts, the aim of which are disrupting the public order, threatening the kingdom's safety and security, and damaging national unity. On June 11, King Hamad signed into law an amendment to the exercise of the political rights law that essentially disqualified many potential opposition and independent candidates from running for office, including in the November elections that were held a few months ago. On June 6, 2017, the Bahraini authorities declared that it would be a crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison to express sympathy with Qatar or criticize Bahrain's decision to break ties with the country. And then finally, there has been the role of the executive. So the cabinet and the respective ministries have also been engaged in orchestrating and implementing this crackdown on freedom of expression. So for example, on March 25, 2018, the Interior Ministry threatened to punish harshly those who criticized the government online, saying that it was already tracking accounts that departed from national norms, customs, and traditions. In 2017, the International Affairs Ministry suspended Al Wasat, which was the last independent newspaper in the country. So this outlook does look pretty bleak, but I think that we should all be very encouraged by the recent victory in Hakim al-Araibi's case. The lesson should be that sustained and principled advocacy coupled with pressure from strong international actors could get Bahrain to change its course. I think using sporting organizations in particular to put pressure has proven to be successful so far, and perhaps this could be an avenue of future work, particularly with the upcoming Formula One races in Bahrain. As more and more states seem uninterested in using their leverage to push Bahrain to reform its human rights record, I think we should look to other sources of influence. And Hakim Arabi's case has demonstrated that sporting organizations might be this new source of influence that we've been looking for. Thank you.
Anyone has a question for her? No? Would anyone has question? Yeah, I will give you that mic.
أعتقد النقاش أخذ منحى آخر. أوكي إحنا الآن بنعمل أسئلة للبوث سبيكرز. أوكي. بس حبيت أكد أنا سامي العبايتي من المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان. هتكلم بالعربي لأن أغلب الحضور. في عندكم translation ولا لا؟ So I'll translate in English also. So I noticed that it's mainly most of the audience here are from the international organizations and from outside Bahrain. I hope that and this is the second meeting that I'm attending with regard to this organization. I hope that you will manage to have some kind of access to inside Bahrain, which is really important to reflect what is going on, because only relying on those open sources and focusing on one or two cases, we will miss a lot of happening there. However, I do agree fully with you about documentation. This is the most important. It's not only, this is the main thing. When you try to raise issues, always you could be defeated with no evidences. But documentation will do that kind of strengthen the case. And even if it's not been used today, my advice, keep it for the proper time, and you can use it, for Bahraini people. Because it's also later stages, then there should be remedies when issues to be solved, and then you need to make some kind of remedies for people who already been suffered a lot of violations. So documentation, I fully agree with you, this is the most important thing that we can do during this period of time when you have no access, when you have no laws that can give the people rights, their rights. And from our side as ORCHR, we have a desk officer that works on monitoring, and we are very welcoming any kind of information that you would like to pass to the Commission and to trigger all those mechanisms, the human rights international mechanisms, to raise issues with the Bahraini government and Bahraini authorities. So it's an invitation for all people who concerns on human rights violations and documenting them. Please approach us on that in this regard. Thank you. And Arabic? بالعربي؟ اوكي. So, يعني أنا أثني على السيد من مهارات كونه ذكر التوثيق. التوثيق مهم جدا، قد لا يكون يعني غير منظور الاستفادة منها الآن، إنه ممكن أن تعمل بعض الإنصاف للأشخاص المنتهكة حقوقهم، لكن في بخبرتنا بالعمل هذا مهم جدا، لأنه في مراحل أخرى لاحقة عندما تبدأ عمليات إعادة الاعتبار لكل الناس اللي انتهكت حقوقهم، حيكون هناك أشياء اللي تعد يعني إعادة الاعتبار تحتاج إلى توثيقات، حتى لو هذا التوثيق لم يستخدم في المرحلة الحالية، لكنه مهم جدا ليستخدم في المراحل اللاحقة. ليس أنه لم يبقى لدينا إلا التوثيق، التوثيق مهم جدا في كل الأشياء، يعني ذلك نحن في المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان لدينا موظفين حقوق إنسان مختصين بالمراقبة أوضاع حقوق الإنسان في البحرين إلى جانب بعض البلدان الأخرى. ندعوكم إذا كان عندكم أي توثيقات لانتهاكات أن يعني تشاركوها مع المكتب، أن لا نستخدم كل الآليات الدولية الخاصة بحقوق الإنسان، آليات الأمم المتحدة، لرفع هذه القضايا والتحدث بها مع الحكومات، محاولة يعني نشرها أيضا، مثل ما يعني الضغوطات اللي السيدة تحدثت عنها بخصوص أنه عندما يكون هناك حدث مهم في داخل البحرين، المقاطعة نوعا ما تضيء على انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان، محاولة إحراج الحكومات بمواقف مثل هذا النوع تؤدي إلى تحسين أوضاع حقوق الإنسان أو الإضاءة على الانتهاكات بدون مجاملات من بين الدول. فأعتقد يعني جيد جدا، بس أتمنى أن يكون هناك ناس من داخل البحرين حتى يعطوا، لأنه في انتهاكات أكيد أخرى داخل البحرين أكثر من القضايا اللي إحنا نسمعها من خلال الإنترنت والوسائل المفتوحة للبصر. شكرا.
أنا يعني بأكد اللي عم تقولي حضرتك، قصة الانتهاكات وقصة توثيق الانتهاكات حاليا هو السبيل الأكبر لموضوع التوثيق بالبحرين، لأنه عم يوصل بالنهاية حيوصل لنتيجة. يعني للأسف حاليا حكومات لا تشكل ضغط على حكومة البحرين دول الكبرى، ولكن بالمستقبل رح يتغير الوضع حتما بهذا الإطار. موضوع التوثيق بالبحرين أو الناس، شكاوي الناس، يمكن أنا بعرف أنه يعني حأخذ عن منظمة سلام شكلت هلأ صندوق للشكاوي خاص سري من الأهالي لمراسلتهم، وعبرهم حتوصل الرسائل للمفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان. يعني أنا بأكد لك هذا الموضوع أنه سيتم بالوقت الحالي. أنا اللي القصد أو الهدف الأساسي بالموضوع اللي عم أقوله أنه حاليا ما رح نوصل يمكن لنتيجة 100%، حاليا ما رح نوصل لنتيجة، بس ما فينا نوقف الشغل على حقوق الإنسان أو حماية حرية التعبير. يعني خليني أقول لكم أنه بالسنتين الأخيرين من 2016 لهلأ مثل ما قلت 1253 حالة انتهاك لحرية التعبير. زميلتي آية قالت أنه إغلاق جريدة الوسط البحرينية اللي هي أحد الصحف، يمكن آخر الصحف المستقلة، إضافة إلى إغلاق جمعيات مثل جمعية وعد. وضع للأسف سيء ويسوء يوميا. للأسف حتى نحن كمجتمع مدني وحقوقيين ما قادرين نوقف بيع رصاص الشوزن يلي يطلق عليه بالبحرين شوزن، يلي عم يطلق من مسافات قصيرة ويقتل العديد من المتظاهرين من قبل بعض الحكومات يلي عم تبيعه حاليا. فتخيل الوضع لوين وصل. حنوقف؟ أكيد لا. يعني الشغل الحقوقي مستمر بشكل كتير كبير. نوصل لنتيجة، بعتقد أنه خلال السنوات القادمة أكيد رح نوصل لنتيجة ورح يتوقف حمام الدم يلي عم نشوفه بالبحرين حاليا.
Just to your point about access, so Human Rights Watch has repeatedly tried to gain access to Bahrain, and each time we've been refused. So the last time that a Human Rights Watch researcher tried to go to Bahrain was, I believe, in 2017. He was our Israel and Palestine researcher, and he was going to Bahrain in order to attend a conference on the activities of sporting organizations in the occupied territories. So he wasn't going to do any Bahrain-related activities, but as soon as he identified himself as a member of Human Rights Watch, he was told that he wasn't welcome in the country. We have been trying to gain access to the country. Unfortunately, our opportunities are quite limited, and so we've taken a position that we can't meet with Bahraini authorities officially outside of Bahrain as long as they deny us access to Bahrain. Having said that, there are several individuals who have tried to gain access to Bahrain, other human rights researchers who were here at the last Bahrain Center for Human Rights conference, and a couple of them were accompanied by prime ministers from European countries, and even then they were denied entry. So I think, though, we discussed this last time as well, that this could be a great pressure point. I think that people should be going to Bahrain and should be demanding access, and when they're turned back, they should be publicizing that they have been turned back from Bahrain. Bahrain plays on its image of itself as a liberal or progressive haven in the Gulf where you can drink, and there are sporting they have the Formula One races, they have the Ironman championships. And so I think part of what we need to do is try to create a change in this image. I think the Hakim al-Araibi case was instrumental in doing that, and that's, I think a big reason behind why they retreated in the end and withdrew the extradition request. It was just too costly for their public image. And I think we need to keep doing that by utilizing other sporting organizations, demanding, going to Bahrain and saying, we're here, we want to be let in, and then we won't be let in, and then publicizing that human rights researchers haven't been let into the country. Another pressure point that we could use is also asking the special rapporteurs on torture and forced disappearance, arbitrary detention, to also request access to Bahrain. So I remember I believe it was 2012, the special rapporteur for torture wanted to visit Bahrain, and they kept postponing the visit, saying, we have some event or we can't do it now, without flatly rejecting. But there hasn't been a follow-up on that. So I think maybe we need to put pressure on the special rapporteurs to now request access. Another key thing we could do is maybe ask the Danish government to request access to visit Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja in prison, who was suffering from a lot of health issues and is a Danish national. So it should be their duty to be able to visit him in prison. So that's another pressure point that we could be using.
You can check on the website of our CSI how many requests from special rapporteurs to Bahraini government to have an access to the country and denied or suspended or on hold. So that's also another point I guess we can correct it. There is a demand from the international community to come and look at the human rights situation and the Bahraini situation.
Right, and and the denial should be very public. The special rapporteur should go on record saying that they were denied entry to Bahrain. Yep. When was the last time that a special rapporteur for torture or enforced disappearance?
Number one, Hakim al-Araibi is a human rights victory. Number two, as you know, there is no formal invitation from special rapporteur to Bahrain. The former High Commissioner, they has asked friends to enter Bahrain. They refused. They said that no, there is no communication between the High Commissioner and the friends, so maybe we can invite you 1 year later. So till now there is no any invitation for the special rapporteur. We're still waiting for the Bahraini authorities to allow the access of special rapporteur. But since 2013, I guess, till now there's no invitation.
Test.
ناخذ لهم صورة. Great. Hello everyone, my name is Josh Cooper, and as Hussein briefly mentioned, I work at Salam for Democracy for Human Rights as a UK advocacy officer. Okay, great. And today I'll be talking briefly on the failure in implementing the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry recommendations. This is a topic I covered recently doing a master's at the School of Oriental and African Studies, so I'll try and draw upon that, but keep it as concise as possible. So why is the BICI, which stands for the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, why is it important? I think in many ways it embodies Bahrain's post-2011 trajectory in terms of the promises, the hope, the international backing, but the ultimate failure. So today I will, in these few minutes, briefly touch upon a bit of the context behind the BICI, a brief description of its failed implementation, which is inherent in the question, and we'll then discuss why this process has failed, highlighting three hindering factors in particular, and finally offer some concluding remarks. So the BICI emerged in the context of the 2011 uprising, following weeks of protests, the brutal regime crackdown leading to deaths and hundreds of arrests. And in light of this and some external pressure, notably from Obama calling for reform, in July 2011, the BICI was established by King Hamad himself with a mandate to look into the events of February and March 2011 and to hopefully pave the way for further transitional justice measures. And it was released as a 500-page report in November that year. Now, despite it being a top-down measure, as I mentioned, established by King Hamad himself, it was in fact led by international experts. It covered in quite some detail the violations committed in February and March, and its findings were actually accepted by the king, perhaps as it stopped short of holding him accountable. But it still signaled the end of a long-standing period of denial in Bahrain, where the government would deny all violations, so it was significant. And although protesters hadn't been exactly calling for a BICI report on the streets, its 26 recommendations did address many of their demands, including around accountability, security sector reform, and freedom of expression. And finally, it paved the way for further investigative and accountability mechanisms, including the Ombudsman's Office, the Special Investigations Unit, and an amended National Institution of Human Rights. However, while in March 2012, the Bahraini government declared unprecedented progress on the implementation of the recommendations, it's clearly failed in its mandate. So I won't go into too much detail, but even by 2012, the Project on Middle East Democracy reported that only 3 of the 26 recommendations had been carried out. The removal of the NSA, the National Security Agency's arrest powers, which obviously was later reversed, and the training of some security and judiciary. But in the years since, all the other recommendations have remained stagnant or even deteriorated quite drastically. So just to mention a few, recommendation 2 to establish independent investigative and accountability mechanisms into allegations of torture, extrajudicial killings, have obviously not been established because these bodies I mentioned earlier, such as the Ombudsman's Office, are not actually independent and are controlled by the Ministry of Interior and contain government personnel. As such, investigating these grave violations has not really happened, which was recommendation 7. As Amnesty's report in 2016 showed, these bodies are largely ineffective and, as was previously mentioned, only really hold to account less senior officers. And there's been no progress in many other of the recommendations, including relating to freedom of expression. Recommendation 14, we've actually seen more charges relating to freedom of expression. Just look at the high-profile cases of Sheikh Ali Salman and Nabil Raja. the relaxation of censorship, recommendation 22, has actually been tightened, and Bahrain's press freedom's among the worst in the world. And finally, the last recommendation to call for a national reconciliation program addressing political, social, economic inequalities sounds rather laughable now in light of the elections, the June 2018 amendment, in which all opposition has been marginalized. So why have the BICR recommendations failed so miserably when it was initially quite a promising process? The concessions clearly haven't had a knock-on effect, which, according to some human rights theories, there's this idea that, yeah, once a government makes a concession, it kind of has a snowball effect, as human rights groups can point to these promises and say, you're not living up to these promises, and it forms a type of rhetorical entrapment. But this clearly hasn't happened. So why is this? I think for Bahrain, quite simply, you have to look at the hindering scope conditions. So I'll draw on three very briefly here. Firstly, Bahrain's regime type. The BICI is a transitional justice measure, which, as the name suggests, involves some sort of transition, but obviously in Bahrain, there hasn't been a transition. The political systems remained very similar since 2011. The chance of revolutionary change was blocked by the crackdown, and there hasn't really been a process of national dialogue. Well, there was one that was started, but it wasn't successful. So given the absence of any political transition, there's not really much chance that these transitional justice measures will be successful. So it maybe mirrors some of the reforms made post-1999 when King Hamad first assumed power. There were some reforms, but not part of a wider political transition, so the reforms were not sustained. Secondly, we've seen a kind of global, regional, and domestic backlash to human rights using two particular counter-narratives. In Bahrain's case, one is sectarian. Although the BICI report confirmed the non-interference of Iran, sectarian allegations continue to be used against the opposition, and these accusations have grown in recent years. And secondly, we've seen security-based counter-narratives. Following the crushing of the peaceful demonstration, there's been a slight rise in street violence, which allows the regime to use a security discourse rather than seeing it as a political problem. And this becomes a sort of self-perpetuating approach. And this can be seen in some of the various policies, such as the restoring of the NSA's arrest powers, which used the blanket of terrorism security-based justifications to enact this measure, which was in fact very expansive. And finally, we must of course look at Bahrain's external support. The BICI process received from the start significant financial capacity building support from Western governments, largely the UK, who have given around 5 million since 2012, I think. And this position was understandable back then, as the BICI was a considerable concession. But when the reform stalls, the international response also remains stagnant and remained tied to these reforms. And there's been little pressure, like we saw in 2011 when America suspended the selling of arms ahead of the finding of the report, which led to the king accepting some of the findings. And this has only got worse in light of the election of Trump, January 2016, and even in the UK post-Brexit. So quite why international actors would support years later these concessions, even when human rights groups, the Project of Middle East Democracy, BIRD, Amnesty in 2016, Salam, all these human rights groups have pointed to these concessions as being whitewashing, ineffective. And it was even raised in UK Parliament in September 2018. There was a debate on UK assistance to Bahrain. So I think these issues are well known. So rather than Western governments being ignorant, I think more clearly it's a cynical tactic to kind of pay lip service to rights without having to confront a geostrategic ally. So to conclude, it's clear the process has failed. To answer why involves answering why human rights as a whole have regressed in Bahrain. So I think for the human rights movement, it's important to be aware of these hindering conditions, to put the regression in the context of the kind of failed political transition, although human rights groups can't address some of the more political questions, but maybe there are ways to to call for wider reform to address socioeconomic rights. Secondly, to be mindful of these counter-narratives, security and sectarian-based counter-narratives, and to be mindful, for instance, of the maybe types of groups who might be interested in Bahrain, to have a broad coalition. And in terms of international support, I think it's important to keep the pressure up, to keep drilling home this discrepancy between rhetoric and practice, and hope there'll be a tipping point at some point where US's support becomes untenable with the reality on the ground. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will leave the questions until the end, and we will do now with Mr. Devin Kenny, Advocacy Officer and Researcher at Amnesty.
اوكي طيب بالاول خليني اعتذر منكم لاني راح اعطي كلمتي بالانجليزي. انا علمت بس هذا الصبح انه انا لازم استبدل عن زميلتي اللي كان مفروض هي تعطي الكلمه اليوم، فما صار لي وقت كتير عشان احضر الكلمه، فعشان هيك ملاحظاتي كمان مش منظمه كتير كمان. So yeah, I've just let myself sorry, I'm Devin Kenny. I'm the researcher on Bahrain from Amnesty International. I've just let myself be guided in my remarks, which I had to prepare this morning by the list of topics that were proposed in the conference schedule. So I'll just take those up one by one. One of these was the status of women human rights defenders in Bahrain. To answer the question of what their status is, you'd have to start by determining what that class of people is. To my knowledge, there's not a great number of women human rights defenders in Bahrain. The number is fairly limited. There's Ibtisam Sayyid. There are the women who work at the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, the organizers of this conference, and then there are the Al-Khawaja sisters, Maryam and Zainab, who are the daughters of Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja. Maryam and Zainab live in exile. I believe they're both in Denmark. They're outside Bahrain for obvious reasons. Their dad's in prison, and Zainab also, I believe, faced some prison time while she was still in Bahrain. BCHR continues to exist on the ground, but they need to work essentially very, very quietly and very cautiously within Bahrain. And Ibtisam Sayyid in 2017 was arbitrarily detained. I'm sure everyone knows the story in this room. She was subjected to extremely severe maltreatment, including sexual assault. In the end, she was not held in prison, although she was detained for a lengthy period of time. Now she's out and is actually continuing her work, which is quite impressive and quite brave under the circumstances. But basically, taking those cases, BCHR forced to work almost in silence within Bahrain, Ibtisam, who faced really severe reprisal, and the Al-Khawaja sisters, who were forced into exile. It's fair to say that there's not any real or safe space for women human rights defenders. I would just note that I don't necessarily see there being a gender motivation for that. It's coincidental that they're women. The issue is their human rights activism, and yeah, the government will target anyone who engages in principled criticism of the government, whether on human rights grounds or otherwise. So that's that topic. The second one was zones of electronic repression. To be honest, I'm not greatly specialized in this subject, so I can only give a couple data points. One is more something that's potential than actual right now, I believe. But if you look at the counterterrorism law, which was mentioned by Hussein Sharif from Maharat before, formal title is قانون كذا كذا لحماية المجتمع من الأعمال الإرهابية. It was issued in 2006. It's been amended a couple times. The 2014 amendment to this law added an Article 27 bis, أو المدى 27 مقررا. And there's some language in there that states that if a security officer has suspicion that a terrorist act has occurred within a certain area, that they're authorized to shut down communications. That's the word used in the text. It's very vague. Ittisalat. So they're authorized to shut down communications in the area for, I believe it's up to 48 hours with a judicial order. So you could see how this could potentially be applied to basically cut off internet or cell phone service in a residential district, say, if there were home raids, detentions, arrests happening in the area. To my knowledge, it hasn't been applied, but it's a horrible piece of legislation, extremely repressive, unaccountable, purely discretionary on its face. So that's problematic, and we may see it applied in the future. And then the other data point on electronic repression that I have is, I believe, during the sit-in protests around the home of Sheikh Isa Qasim in Daraz, which lasted up until spring 2017 when they were dispersed. As I recall, there was partial denial or interruption of internet service around that time, but I don't have further details to offer today. And lastly, there's this topic or premise that Bahrain is approaching a complete shutdown on freedom of expression. I would tend to agree with that. I'd say that's a fair assessment. That's not just rhetoric. If you look at the series of verdicts against Nabil Rajab, I know his name is invoked constantly, and I'm not interested in just ritualistically invoking it. I think it's interesting to actually look at the details of the case and ask you what it tells us. It's interesting to me because he is such a prominent figure with very well established international connections among human rights community, diplomatic community, very friendly face to Western governments, et cetera, and he was still prosecuted pretty shamelessly and imprisoned on pure speech crimes charges. If you read the verdicts against him, and it's verdicts plural, there's been quite the series. There is no premise whatsoever that he engaged in any kind of acts of violence or even incitement to violence. If he incited anything, it was people to have critical thoughts against the government, and you find that within the court verdicts against him. It's pure speech crimes. The same is true of the first verdict against Sheikh Ali Salman. He's had 2 verdicts against him, and the second is spurious charges about spying for Qatar, but the first one was very simply, he gave a political speech. That was it, open and shut. He gave a political speech, and he was prosecuted for that. And then you find the same level of intolerance for speech even in smaller cases, if you will, by which I mean cases that are people less prominent, less threatening to the Bahraini government. A recent example that I can speak to, just because I've looked at it recently, is Najah Ahmed Yusuf, who's imprisoned in Isa Town Women's Prison. The court case against her consists entirely of cyber speech charges. The evidence that the court and the prosecution compiled against her is just a series of posts on Facebook, Twitter, etc. So this isn't particularly well concealed at any level. It's very overt how aggressive the government is in quashing freedom of expression, which is also reflected in a lot of articles, even in the regular penal code, even not looking at the more repressive counterterrorism laws passed recently. So I have further examples of that, but legal articles are pretty boring, so I think I'll skip that and just close my remarks here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kanye. We will be now with our last panelist, Mr. Dimitris Christopoulos. He's the president of the International Federation for Human Rights.
Thank you very much. I think I am the least expert on what is happening in Bahrain in this panel. That's why I'll try a little bit to contextualize the recent developments in this country in the light of what is happening in the rest of the world, and particularly what is happening within the European Union. Let me first start by saying, since I arrived last night here, that I'm sure you know that the European Union names, labels of the last 3 years of the population flows from the east and the south to its territory as a refugee crisis. And being here in a country of 4 million with 500,000 of Palestinian refugees, 1 million of Syrian refugees, correct me if the numbers are not updated, I have to say how disgraceful I feel for being a citizen of a European Union of 500 million, which considers refugee crisis the arrival of 1.5 million of population over the last 3 years, which goes under 0.3 of the total population of the European Union. It's not by accident I start with this, because I will refer again to the European Union regarding Bahrain during the 7 minutes I will share with you. So obviously, dear friends, I am the last and the least to say here that things are going wrong in Bahrain. We heard it already, it has been documented. I mean, a consolidation of state authoritarianism along with, sectarianism, and of course, generalized impunity and lack of accountability of all the authorities of the country is what characterizes the general trend in this state after 2011. So what is the answer we give here? And I'm not going to say something completely original, but I just want to contextualize again, where do we stand as human rights defenders in this context? I mean, the answer is obviously individual freedoms, rule of law, pluralism, and so on. So this is what we can give. This is our word. This is, as said, is not only rhetoric. Once it's documented and it's strategized, it can offer more. But the real question which underlines this discussion is why this answer does not count, why we're not taken into consideration. So, I mean, why Bahrain is going so far, too far, in denying our answer? And the real answer to this question, why Bahrain is going too far, is that, unfortunately, cynically enough, it goes too far because it can go too far. That is the answer. Bahrain goes too far because, unfortunately, it can go too far, given the international circumstances this country is in over the last years. So, yes, today, as we all know, money talks more than ever. And this universality of human rights that we are all supposed to advocate here is cynically challenged, not in the name of cultural relativism as it used to be before, because that is an old debate of the human rights field. Today what is happening is that universality of human rights is challenged from within. Universality of human rights is not challenged by some remote communitarianist somewhere lost in Asia arguing that human rights are not universal. The universality of human rights is challenged from the ones that once used to advocate that human rights are universal. We have a new form of governance which is formed and emerging today in the world, which simply challenges the very idea that we need rights. And this is what connects the President of the United States with the President of Russia, with the President of Philippines, with the President of Brazil, with the Prime Minister of Hungary, with the President of Turkey, and so on. This is one line which regards what we are doing as an unreasonable luxury or a direct threat to effective governance and security. So if you want to speak about the problem Bahrain today, you need to contextualize it by arguing that the core of the problem is not only Bahrain as such. It's the fact that Bahrain today is surrounded by countries that would once used to denounce what is happening today in Bahrain, whereas today they keep on being silent because they consider that this is not the problem. And what can be the problem? some kind of, geopolitical considerations that are, and narratives who are talking about, the strategic alliance between the Saudi Arabians and so on. I was in New York the other day where the new anti-terrorist structure of the United States, of the United Nations is created, headed by a Russian diplomat financed semi-exclusively by Saudi Arabia. So you see no problem to create the alliance there. So this is the world we're living in. This is the problem Bahrain is facing. Our people in Bahrain, this is their problem. So, and it's not only Trump, because it's easy to blame Trump. Obviously we will blame Trump. It's not only him. What I'm supposed to say coming from this old continent, the European Union, that shamefully, as I said, labels refugee crisis the arrival of 1 million refugees, externalizes refugee and migration management to Turkey, buying off its own silence for the authoritarian shift in Turkey, and so on and so on. So this is the circumstances we are living in, and so I guess that this should be seriously taken in consideration when we are talking about Bahrain, which is a small country, in the position it is, and so on and so on. Of course, with the tradition it has, and etc. So, I mean, what we can do, and the real question, I mean, this is the hardcore of the political question, which regards Bahrain in this negative geopolitical and moral context I try to share with you. Obviously, I think that what we are doing here, that we are trying to expose the violations, we try to document and we do the correct things. I mean, we do the maximum we can, but we also need a little bit, instead of exercise, we need also to consider that instead of only exercising our pressure to the authorities in Bahrain, that we very well do, we need a little bit to expose the responsibility of Western actors, and particularly the European Union, which is shamefully silent in public when it comes to Bahrain, because I've spoken with most of the European ambassadors in Paris regarding Bahrain. In private, I can tell you that they shared most of my considerations, but when the meeting was finishing, actually the discussion was semi-over. So, and that was, I think this is what exactly shows how and why things are going wrong today in the European Union. Because in the name of obvious geopolitical expediencies and considerations, we are becoming the beast that we are supposed to be fighting against. This is what is happening today in the European Union. And once this process of degeneration develops, then it will be very late. It's already late. It's already late for the Europeans. So, one last word, being the president of the International Federation for Human Rights, where this lovely man used to be for years the Secretary General. I know most of us have been intensively following the case of Nabil, and we all know that Nabil is par excellence the definition of the political prisoner, which was also said before, so I do not need much in order to document and support this idea. The only thing I'd like to say here is that I come from a country also that has in its history some difficult moments of dictatorships and shifts from constitutionality and so on. And there was a theory in Greece in the 60s which tended to speak of the so-called internal enemy. The internal enemy is not the is the dangerous citizen, is not the guilty citizen. So I think what we're facing here is someone who is considered as an internal enemy being a dangerous, not guilty citizen. A dangerous citizen for an authoritarian regime, but of course not guilty because he has committed no crime, as I said. I mean, if there is a crime committed, it is incitement to live in peace and to criticize a government, which for any country in the world, of course, is something that should be accepted and tolerated. So, and not only Nabil is a dangerous citizen, but he's also a dangerous detainee. And that's why he's isolated in the prisons. That's why he's alone. He's not able to communicate with other people who will share even his language. And that's why we are facing a situation that someone is considered as dangerous, even incarcerated. And this is his case. So what we can do, I think that we should continue. We should a little bit refresh our strategies, and we should focus more to the European Union's shameful silence. Bahrain, that's the way of the world, in a month from now undertakes membership in the UN Human Rights Council. I think it's time a little bit to put some pressure there so Bahrain at least releases some prisoners, kids, old people, sick people, and so on. Let's say not even them. I mean, starting from the elementary, and obviously to expose the moral, the political risks of the Europeans who, should they continue the way they continue, they will soon become worse than the beast that they're supposed to be fighting against. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dimitris, and also for all the panelists who shared with us their observation about Bahrain situation. We can open now the floor for questions if anyone would like to ask the panelists about anything. Okay. Okay, so I have already the questions here. Are they addressed to any of the panelists or in general?
No, in general.
In general, okay. So the first question, human rights defenders in Bahrain are either in prison, jail, living in exile, or under constant threats. What can international organizations and NGOs do to protect them? Is it enough to publish statements? How can we go beyond? Should I continue? I ask all the questions and then they answer, or one by one? Okay.
Probably one at a time. I don't have a great answer for this question, which is asked at every conference. The question being asked is basically, how do you change the world for the better? And I don't think any human being has that fully figured out. But to just toss out some modest suggestions, it is nice, if you will, that we continue to get signs that the Bahraini government is at least somewhat subject to shaming. It's sometimes a dictatorship will go so far that international or public opinion is completely irrelevant to it, but Bahrain is not there yet. We're still sorting out what happened in the Hakim al-Araibi case, but it appears that one or both sides, either Thailand or Bahrain, basically became too embarrassed by the quite impressive amount of international media and sports celebrity attention that was bringing to the case. It was just a bad look for the countries, and so they backed off. It's a factual question what happened, whether Bahrain withdrew its extradition request or whether Thailand decided to nix it. But it is a sign of ability to be embarrassed by their own actions. So I think that's our pressure point, and we need to work with it. And Aya from Human Rights Watch has already pointed to the Formula One races as a forthcoming example, which, yeah, absolutely is a tactical opportunity. It's worth taking advantage of anything that Bahrain clearly views as a plus for its international image, and there's material out there indicating strongly that they do view the Formula One races as sort of a, as a burnish or a brush up for their image. So again, it's pretty modest, but yeah, as a tactical suggestion, looking at ways to make the government feel, as it should, ashamed of its conduct around these prominent international events where it attempts to put a good image forward seems smart to me.
Would you like to answer as well?
Yeah, just to say, just to follow on that, I think Bahrain, the fact that it, does use the rhetoric of human rights as sort of a double-edged sword, so it means unlike countries on the periphery of the international system, maybe like Russia or, Syria, that they don't use the discourse of human rights, but then at the same time, it allows Western countries to kind of say, oh, look, they're on the right track. So I think drilling home this imbalance between the rhetoric and the practice is important. In terms of Hakim's case, I mean, yeah, it's still maybe too early to quite dissect quite why it worked, but it's clear that it was multi-layered, high-level, the social media, so there's a lot of room for hope. But I guess how we create that immediacy, because with Hakim, it was, yeah, kind of immediate threat of being extradited to Bahrain and then the 60 days extension. So I think for other cases who are, stranded in prison inside Bahrain, sometimes these cases, once they pass the court stage, then it becomes hard to really reignite that kind of momentum and a really active campaign. So, yeah, any ways, inventive ways that, yeah, these can be ignited is always good.
Thank you. The next question is, what mechanisms can be used to pressure Bahrain to finally give access to UN special rapporteurs and the UCHR, especially that Bahrain is now a member in the Human Rights Council?
We kind of already went over this. There was a transaction between our OHCHR colleagues and Aya. I don't want to turn it into a thing like you need to do this or you haven't done this well enough, but I am aware of the website that lists the active requests. I just went over it recently so that we could include some of the data in our annual report. And it is valuable, but I'm not sure it's comprehensive. And in any case, what was done with the special rapporteur on torture was useful. It was very useful for international human rights organizations, just the way he made that very public instead of making it a technical thing, which is sort of what the chart on the website is. It's sort of a listing of request made, pending answer, etc. In the case of the special rapporteur on torture, he did his bona fides. He gave Bahrain plenty of time and made, good faith efforts to make the visit work. And then after they had delayed for 1 or 2 years, he issued a public statement that said, no, I'm calling out Bahrain. This is denial of access. So that was useful. I know that the UN as an institution can't and doesn't do stunts like human rights orgs do, but I don't know, the special rapporteurs are in kind of a special position given that they're unsalaried independent actors, if you will, with the UN's good name attached to them. So that was a helpful thing, and in general, I like this idea that's been floated both at this conference and at one last month about not just the UN, but about human rights orgs attempting to enter Bahrain, not by asking, but by showing up at the airport and then publicizing the ejection, which is sure to follow. There's some budget concerns about that because that requires a plane ticket, so that's a lot of money, but I do like the idea. I think that it hasn't been tried so much before, hasn't been publicized as much as it could have before, and it's maybe a step forward from just these quiet diplomatic asks for access that we keep repeating.
Thank you. I have one question and then I can give you the floor. Nabil Rajab is a very influential human rights defender. How can we help him? How can we help in putting pressure to release him, same as what happens to Hakim?
Yeah, I just struggle with this one a lot, and say for instance in the UK, at Salam, based in the UK, and do work in Parliament with politicians, and we've requested multiple times to meet with the FCO on this case, because for instance before the appeal was upheld, the Foreign Office was saying we're not going to get too involved, he still has the right to appeal, and then as soon as the appeal's made, they're silent, they release a very weak sort of 1 or 2 sentence statement. So I guess keep really drilling home the point, because it's very shameful position, but I guess how to create that immediacy around the case, whether there's some kind of target we can create, such as, yeah, he needs to be released by this point, or when he's denied access to health or anything like that, to really put a spotlight on the case again, because yeah, I fear it kind of goes by the wayside sometimes once the final appeal is made.
Thank you. You can ask your question.
I think that you raised before that the case of Nabil is singular in the sense that we have somebody who is extremely influential in his society, someone who is very well known to international media, to diplomats, very familiar with the international human rights world and so on. And despite all that, he's facing the situation he's facing in his country. So the real question, I think, the hardcore political question behind this situation is, what do Bahraini authorities want after all? Who is for them the ideal opponent? Why they feel so unsafe with someone that advocates nonviolence? Why they feel so unsafe with someone who advocates human rights in the way Nabil does? Why they seem to prefer other opponents than him? So I think that we have a hardcore political question here which needs to be exposed, not only before the Bahraini authorities, but as I said, also before the European Union and the rest of the world. Because it appears today that treating Nabil the way they treat him shows that he is considered as by far the most dangerous, influential political figure in his country, by advocating peace, non-violence, and condemning torture and illegal activities carried out by the government. So, why such a person is so dangerous for Bahraini authorities? I have some thoughts that I would not like to share them in public, but I think that we need to face this question and to put this question not only to Bahraini authorities, but as I said, to other authorities, mainly of the Western world, that might have a word to say on that.
Thank you. Devin, would you like to say anything? That's okay. You had a question?
Maybe it's past the chance because we were talking about human rights telling that not only this special rapporteur is the only venue for raising these issues. There are so many sets of countries of even more effective. You can raise those issues as a shadow. I can tell you, Bahrain is doing badly on reporting stuff for the critical overview for so many critical PRC, rights for political rights and civil rights. Almost all the critical, they didn't receive timely the state report. But that doesn't mean that the civil society and the shadow agents cannot be submitted. So this is another way to put a pressure on the government to say something about these reports on validation. This is one venue. And also, it's coming from the community, the human rights community in Bahrain. It puts a lot of pressure on the special rapporteurs, not only one, they can collectively, like 3, 4 of them, trigger on certain case. They need to think that they need to compete with other countries on having the special rapporteurs to come to announce something. You know that they have only one secretariat for 9 special rapporteurs. So when they receive from Myanmar, from Middle East, other countries with certain grave violations, or from Latin America, the Bahraini they would like to highlight these issues. They need to put a lot of pressure on that secretariat to raise that issue. So there is another role for the human rights communities in the group to play to put a pressure on, to bring this up. So it's not only those mechanisms, also don't need it, I believe. Her voice can read. Yeah. So the shadow reports, the announcements, the letters to the special rapporteurs, always document cases, raising them in the press. I know it's not easy inside of Bahrain, but your role here is a little bit away and a little bit safer than being like Nabil Rajab to raise issues. So you can put that kind of a pressure. You can use also your networks, in the regional networks in the Arab region, because there are some similarities in these aspects. This is the same aspect for the GCC countries. You know, they put pressure on the freedom of speech. They are afraid of shaking their long controlling countries with such kind of royal system. So shaking those also can help to lift some pressure on those victims of violations and freedom of speech. So I believe there is a lot of things and venues to work on to bring human rights issues and trying to even improve it. I mean, the main objective, I don't believe, is only just to blame the government, but it's also to improve the situation of human rights through many different tactics to work with these authorities to respect the human rights. The main objective is let those authorities to respect the human rights rather than blaming. I mean, it's more to have this kind of even cooperation. I mean, we are trying hard as OHCHR to enter some countries that is blocked to us. We are not allowed to enter Bahrain. But I believe if we can have reach a kind of cooperation agreement to be there, it will improve, it will change. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another thing to add. There should be a recorded video for Judy Ginsburg, but for technical issues that wasn't possible, so I'm going to read the speech of hers. Yes. Judy Ginsburg, Chief Executive of Freedom of Expression Organization, Index on Censorship. Good day. My name is Judy Ginsburg, and I am the Chief Executive of Freedom of Expression Organization, Index on Censorship. Index, based in London, defends freedom of expression and campaigns against censorship around the globe, and we have a long-standing relationship with Bahrain. In 2012, we awarded our Freedom of Expression Award for campaigning to Nabil Rajab and the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. In 2014, in my first few months as chief executive, I was fortunate to meet Nabil Rajab here in London, and together we campaigned on behalf of Mariam Al-Khawaja after she was arrested and charged with assaulting a police officer. I have not seen Nabil since then. I have not seen him because of the Bahraini government's attitude towards freedom of expression and because of a failure by international allies, the UK in particular, to speak out against the declining space for free speech in Bahrain. Following the suspension of Al-Wasat newspaper, there is no free media in Bahrain. We have seen the 2002 press law and the 2006 anti-terrorism law used to target the media by branding groups and individuals who criticized the government a threat to national security. But this attempt to silence freedom of expression does not stop at Bahrain's borders. I am also deeply troubled by the way in which the Bahraini government punishes those who express their views about the regime freely abroad in countries such as the UK by targeting their families in Bahrain. I mention, for example, the case of Sayyid Ahmad al-Wada'i, whose relatives were sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2017 in what the international community has said is a clear reprisal for his activism. This year, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office has launched a landmark campaign to promote media freedom worldwide. I want to use this opportunity in speaking to you today to call on the UK to use this moment to call out explicitly those countries stifling a free media and freedom of expression more generally and demand a change, and this includes Bahrain. I expect to see a clear commitment for Bahrain's allies that continued cooperation is dependent on Bahrain's commitment to uphold universal human rights. This means Bahrain should release with immediate effect those convicted of no crime other than exercising the right to freedom of speech, allow the establishment of a free and independent media, and cease persecution of the families of those who enjoy the freedom of speech that Bahrain outlaws to criticize the government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yes.
I think we will end the panel here. Thank you very much for listening to our panelists, and I would like also to thank our panelists for being here. Okay, so here you go. Okay.
So I have been requested to read the final statement. Beirut, February 13, 2019, human rights organizations call for accountability regarding human rights violations in Bahrain. A conference on the human rights situation in Bahrain was held in Beirut on the 13th of February 2019 with the participation of international human rights organizations, experts, activists, and researchers. Members of prominent organizations such as Human Rights Watch, International Federation for Human Rights, Amnesty International, Index on Censorship, and others have participated in the discussions of the topic of the conference. All participants have agreed on the need for accountability to deal with the ongoing deterioration of the human rights situation that has been happening since 2011. Some of the topics discussed revolved around the status of women human rights defenders, the shutdown on freedom of expression, the forms of electronic repression, the failure in implementing the BICI recommendations, and the lack of accountability in Bahrain. Among the participants, some of the important statements were: the advocacy officer at Salam DHR, Josia Cooper, said that it's clear that BICI process has long come to an halt. To answer why involves answering why human rights as a whole have regressed in Bahrain, including in the absence of any political transition, sectarian and security narratives, and international support. Jody Ginsberg, the CEO at Index on Censorship, commented that I expect to see a clear commitment from Bahrain's allies that continued cooperation is dependent on Bahrain's commitment to uphold universal human rights. Aya Majoud, the researcher at Human Rights Watch, declared that the recent victory in Hakim al-Rabi's case proves that the effort to put pressure on Bahrain has been successful in order to reform its human rights record. That's it. Thank you.